Today is Chapter 11, The Oregon Trail. Hello friends, welcome back to Riverwood Cabin. I'm Rosie Boom and I'm reading to you from Where Lions Roar at Night, the first book in the Barn Chronicles series. And today is Chapter 11, The Oregon Trail. The next morning, the rat lay dead on the grass. Mum was delighted. No one knew who the real hero was, but in Mum's eyes, Shasta, Angel and Lucy were all heroes and got a lot of fussing. I bet every pioneer would have had their weak spot, mentioned Mum at breakfast. Absolutely, agreed Dad and winked at the kids. You, my dear, are simply amazing. Not many women would be happy to live in this old barn, but you thrive on it, rodents aside. Mum smiled at him. She looked perky and bright. Today, I'm going to do something special with my boys, she announced. Jake and Sam glanced up from their breakfast with expectant eyes. Millie flashed a look that said she didn't like the sound of them doing something special without her. We are going to set out on the Oregon Trail, declared Mum. Auntie Penny has said we can use her wagon and go camping up the mountain. Yes, said Sam and Jake in unison. Mum had been reading them stories about families that set off on the Oregon Trail in search of land and a better life. It would be fun to pretend they were pioneers too. That's not fair, cried Millie. Mum smiled at her. I think it's very fair. You're going to have a whole week of fun at camp. Millie looked down at her plate and didn't say anything. Josiah and Kate were heading off to be leaders at a kids' camp, and she and Ellie were going along as well. She'd been looking forward to it for a long time. But it wasn't fair that the boys were going to get to go camping with the wagon before she did. After lunch, Mum and the boys drove up to Auntie Penny's. She and Uncle Dave owned 70 acres at the top end of the road. Their land included one side of a mountain, a large pine forest, and a scoria quarry at the top of a hill. Just the other week, Auntie Penny had made a cover for her wagon and fitted it out with 2 foam mattresses that filled the space and could sleep 3 at a squeeze. It looked just like an early settler's covered wagon. The boys loaded the sleeping bags, food, matches and cooking utensils in the wagon, while Mum and Auntie Penny harnessed up Seth. He was a Clydesdale Appaloosa cross and had a wonderful Roman nose, a strawberry roan body and flaxen mane and tail. I can hardly remember how to put on the harness, said Mum, as she watched Penny put the collar on Seth's strong neck. Hard to believe it's nearly 35 years since I drove tourists around the orchard in an antique wagon. Shivers, I can't even remember how to attach the traces. Auntie Penny laughed. I don't think you'll have any trouble with Seth. He's very quiet, but I'll drive him up the mountain if you like. Mum looked relieved. Thanks, I'll feel a lot easier if you come with us. Sam and Jake trembled with excitement as they climbed up onto the seat. It seemed very high. Auntie Penny took up the reins and Mum called out, "On to Oregon!" Seth leaned into the harness and they were off. The wagon rocked and rolled as they made their way up the steep track that looped around the mountain. Seth had his head low and the muscles in his haunches rippled as he pulled the wagon onward and upward. It was a long time before they reached the flat paddock beside the quarry. A large outcrop of volcanic rocks and a few old puriri trees stood in the long green grass that rippled in the wind. Behind the rocks stood the pine forest, looking dark and mysterious. Auntie Penny reined in Seth, who stood with his sides heaving. Far below them stretched miles and miles of countryside. On the horizon, the distant mountains looked purple in the late afternoon light. Rolling hills, rows and rows of poplars and groves of native trees all shone in a dozen shades of green. The paddocks looked like a giant patchwork quilt spread out across the land. "Are we there, Mummy?" asked Jake. "Have we reached Oregon?" She gazed down at the valley below them. "Well, it certainly looks like we've reached the land of milk and honey. I think we'll set up camp over there by the rocks." They found a flat spot for the wagon and then unhitched Seth. As soon as he was free, he found a patch of long grass, turned around a few times and then sank to his knees. The boys clapped as he rolled over and over, kicking his legs in the air as if he was just a playful colt. Then he heaved himself up and ambled off to enjoy a well-earned feed. "Have a great time," said Auntie Penny as she prepared to walk back down, "and watch out for Indians." "Thanks, Penny. Right, boys," instructed Mum, "you know what to do. Let's get a fire going so we can cook dinner before the sun sets." The boys ran off and quickly came back with suitable twigs and wood. Mum soon had a simple meal on the go, and the three of them sat down on some rocks and watched the sun sink behind the hills. Pinks and golds and reds lit up the sky, and the valley below was suffused with a golden light. "What a sight," said Mum. "It looks like the promised land." Once the sun disappeared, the air became crisp and chilly, and a stiff breeze blew up the mountain. "At least we'll keep each other warm, snuggled up in the wagon," said Sam. Mum turned on the camping lantern and hung it from one of the hoops of the wagon cover. The wagon glowed with a warm golden light. She had wanted to bring in one of her kerosene lanterns, but Dad had told her it would make a lot more sense to take the camping lantern. They sat around the fire and Mum opened the Dutch oven. The smell of hot damper bread wafted out. They ate the whole loaf, and then Mum said, "Why don't we ring Dad and let him know we reached Oregon safely?" "Mum," exclaimed Sam, frowning, "the settlers didn't have cell phones." Jake's face lit up. "Why don't we pretend we're being attacked by Indians?" A gleam came into Mum's eyes. "Great idea, Jake. I'll talk for a few seconds and then you and Sam scream out a warning." The boys crowded around while Mum called the barn. "Hi, darling," began Mum with a twinkle in her eye. "Just ringing to let you know we've reached Oregon and made camp. It's so beautiful here and—" "Indians!" screamed the boys at the top of their voices. "Ambush!" Mum made a few desperate sounds and then gave a strangled yell. "Help us! We're surrounded! They're coming close!" Then she cut the call. The boys laughed and clapped their hands. "Good one, Mum!" The next minute, the phone rang and Mum burst out laughing. The ring was the music from the Lone Ranger and sounded just like a cavalry charge. "Hold on!" yelled a voice at the other end. "The cavalry are on their way." Mum chuckled and informed the caller that she and the boys had successfully repelled the attack by themselves and didn't need any help. It was getting cold by now, and the wagon looked inviting. Sam put out the fire, and they all crept into the wagon and got into their sleeping bags. It was a tight squeeze. Mum secured the end flaps and then settled back against her pillow and began to read the boys a story. She smiled as she watched their eyelids grow heavier and heavier, and soon she quietly closed the book and lay back on her pillow. The next thing she knew, Jake was gently shaking her and whispering, "Mummy, I need to go to the toilet." They managed to climb out of the wagon without waking Sam, and then stood together and gazed up at the sky. It was alive with glittering stars that seemed to smile down on them. It felt like they were on the very top of the world. Jake ran off behind the rocks, but soon reappeared, looking scared. "What's that awful sound, Mummy? Is it the lions?" He had only ever heard them once before, and they did sound terrible out there on the Oregon Trail. "It sure is," said Mum, smiling at her boy. He looked so very little in the darkness. "Quick, back to the wagon.